Have you ever heard the story of Job in the Bible? Well, today I'm going to show you how this story explains Job's journey to loving God unconditionally. What is going on, everyone? We are back for another episode of Prospering with Christ. I hope that you had a wonderful week last week, and I hope that this week will be just as amazing to you as well. So, for today's episode, we are doing part 3 of Job's journey to learning how to love God unconditionally. If you haven't already, make sure that you go back and you listen to episodes 176 and 177 in order to understand this episode, because we are picking up in the middle of the book of Job. And we're going to start at chapter 17. Job continues to defend his innocence. My spirit is crushed and my life is nearly snuffed out. The grave is ready to receive me. I am surrounded by mockers. I watch how bitterly they taunt me. You must defend my innocence, O God, since no one else will stand up for me. You have closed their minds to understanding, but do not let them triumph. They betray their friends for their own advantage, so let their children faint with hunger. God has made a mockery of me among the people. They spit in my face. My eyes are swollen from weeping, and I am but a shadow of my former self. The virtuous are horrified when they see me. The innocent rise up against the ungodly. The righteous keeps moving forward, and those with clean hands become stronger and stronger. As for all of you, come back with a better argument, though I still won't find a wise man among you. My days are over. My hopes have disappeared. My heart's desires are broken. These men say that night is day. They claim that the darkness is light. What if I go to the grave and make my bed in darkness? What if I call the grave my father and the maggot my mother or my sister? Where then is my hope? Can anyone find it? No, my hope will go down with me to the grave. We will rest together in the dust. What stood out to me in this chapter was verses 2 through 4. It says, I am surrounded by mockers. I watch how bitterly they taunt me. You must defend my innocence, O God, since no one else will stand up for me. You have closed their minds to understanding, but do not let them triumph. This reminds me so much of when we're in situations where we believe something so heartedly, but no one around us can see it. In Job's situation, he believes so heartedly that he is innocent. He believes so heartedly that he did not do anything to deserve what he is going through. But everyone around him, his friends, people walking down the street, everyone around him is making a mockery of him. Everyone around him is trying to tell him, you must have sinned. You must have made a mistake. You must be evil. You must be this type of person. You must have this type of character. It's like he believes something with all of his heart, but nobody else is able to see what he sees. Nobody else is able to see this from his point of view, from his standpoint. Have you ever experienced a moment in your life where everybody made you feel crazy because they cannot see what God has planted inside of you? There is something that God promised you. There is an instruction that God gave you. There is something that God told you to do, and you've been working by faith. You've been holding on to it by faith. You've been stepping out by faith, and nobody around you can understand. Your mother can't understand. Your father can't understand. Your friends can't understand. The people in your environment can't understand. And this whole time, they have been calling you crazy. This whole time, they have been trying to talk you out of moving into the things that God has told you to do, because they can't see and they can't understand what He is doing. And maybe while you've been sitting here and you've been stepping out on faith, trusting God, things have not been working. You've been experiencing seasons of failure. You've been experiencing seasons of suffering. And the same people who have been questioning why you even stepped out to do this, they are witnessing the suffering and the storms that you are going through. And now They're at a point where they're using those storms against you. They're using those storms to kill the seed that God has planted in your heart. They tell you things like, see, I told you that wasn't going to work. You misheard. That was not God speaking to you. You misheard, because if God was going to give you this, if God told you that he was going to do this, if God told you that you were going to have this, he would never have allowed you to fail at experiencing it. They use your failures, they use your storms, they use your suffering to kill the seeds that God has planted inside of your heart. I want to give an example to make this more real. God has been speaking to you, and he has been telling you to step out and to try entrepreneurship. But everybody in your life is job minded. So they don't understand why you would ever want to step out into entrepreneurship when it's not secure. At least when you have a job, you know how much you're getting paid. You know when you get paid. You know how many hours you work. You can properly schedule your time. And they just don't understand why you would want to go from something that is so secure to step out to something that is so inconsistent. Something where you might put in all this work and you're not making any income, to something where you might make a lot of money one month and make nothing the next month. They don't understand why you would want to step out and do something that is so inconsistent. They cannot see what God said to you. They cannot see the vision that God gave you. And maybe you stepped out. Maybe you tried and your business has not taken off yet. Your entrepreneur journey has not been successful yet. And they use that situation to say to you, see, maybe you misheard. Maybe God is not the one who told you to do that. Maybe that was a desire in your heart and you mixed it up as being God, but it was not. It was you. What God actually wants you to do is God wants you to find a job. They tell you that your failure is God speaking to you and telling you to go find a job. He's speaking to you and telling you quit this thing. He's speaking to you and telling you do not work or do not try an entrepreneurship anymore. It is so hard to keep going when every single person around you is telling you that you are crazy. It's telling you that it's not going to work. It's telling you the opposite of what God said to you. There's a reason why God tells us to speak what we want, even if we don't believe it. Because although we don't believe it, if we keep saying it, we train our mind to treat it as it's true. We train our mind to get open to the possibility that maybe this can happen. Maybe this is possible. Maybe we can have this. So we have to speak things that we don't believe until we get to a place where we believe them. But there's a downside to that. Because when somebody is speaking negativity into you, when somebody is speaking doubt into you, when somebody is speaking things that will kill your dreams, it's going to get to a point where the more you hear that, the more you start to believe it. The more that people say that you are crazy for stepping out and trying this, the more you're going to start questioning, am I crazy? The more you're going to start questioning God on things that he never said to you, things that people around you planted inside of you. And this is a prime example as to why we always talk about changing your environment when you are in a down season. You have to be very protective of who you have in your space. You have to be very protective of who you allow to speak into you, because the things that they say to you are seeds that they are planting inside of you. And those seeds will continue to grow. They will continue to develop, and they will turn into your thought process. They will turn into things that you believe. And changing our environment is something that's easier said than done, because a lot of us are in positions where we don't know the environments to go to. We don't have replacement environments. So what are we supposed to do when we do not have the capability to change our environment? What if the people in our environment are people that we live with? What if the people that are in our environment are people that we have to see and we have to communicate with? If you can't change your environment, you have to protect it. You have to learn how to discern people's intentions. You have to learn to stand firm in your faith and say, if you're not speaking things that aligns with what God said to me, I can no longer listen to you. If you're not speaking things that are going to push me towards where God told me to go, I can no longer speak to you. I understand you're trying to comfort me. I understand you have good intentions. I understand you want to be here for me, but I'm going to have to deny you access to me in this season. I can only surround myself with people who are going to enhance my mindset, not kill it. So let's go to chapter 18. Then Bildad the Shuhite replied, "How long before you stop talking? Speak sense if you want us to answer. Do you think we are mere animals? Do you think we are stupid? You may tear out your hair in anger, but will that destroy the earth? Will it make the rocks tremble? Surely the light of the wicked will be snuffed out. The sparks of their fire will not glow. The light in their tent will grow dark. The lamp hanging above them will be quenched. The confident stride of the wicked will be shortened. Their own schemes will be their downfall. The wicked walk into a net. They fall into a pit. A trap grabs them by the heel. A snare holds them tight. A noose lies hidden on the ground. A rope is stretched across their path. Terrors surround the wicked and trouble them at every step. Hunger depletes their strength, and calamity awaits for them to stumble. Disease eats their skin. Death devours their limbs. They are torn from the security of their homes and are brought down to the kings of terrors. The homes of the wicked will burn down. Burning sulfur rains on their houses. Their roots will dry up, and their branches will wither. All memory of their existence will fade from the earth. No one will remember their names. They will be thrust from light into darkness, driven from the world. They will have neither children nor grandchildren, nor any survivor in the place where they lived. People in the west are appalled at their fate. People in the east are horrified. They will say, "This is the home of a wicked person, a place of the one who rejected God." I want to see if you notice this. In chapter 17, verse 4, Job said that God had closed their minds to understanding. And then in chapter 18, verse 2, Bildad said, "Speak sense if you want us to answer." Bildad's response is confirmation that God did not give them revelation to understand this situation. See, I understand that Job is frustrated by how his friends are coming at him. I understand that Job is frustrated that his friends cannot see his point of view. His friends cannot understand how he feels. They can't understand his viewpoint on the situation. But this confirms that God did not open their eyes and give them understanding to what he is doing in this season. We are going to experience moments in our life where God gives us something. He gives us an instruction. He gives us a promise. He gives us something. And we try to move in that area, and people around us cannot understand. They cannot see the vision that God gave us. They're looking at the same thing, but they cannot see it in the way that we see it. And we get frustrated with them. We don't understand why it's so hard for them to understand where we are coming from. But what we don't realize is that God has put blinders up on them. God has covered their eyes. God does not want them to be able to see what He is doing through us in this season. See, God puts blinders up on people for many different reasons. But when it comes to Job's friends, the reason why they are not able to see is because they are unteachable. Even if God was to come and tell them, this is what I'm doing, even if God was to use somebody to tell them this is what I'm doing, they would dismiss it because that answer does not align with what they know. That answer does not align with what they think is happening, with what they think God is doing. So they will reject that wisdom. They will reject that prophetic word. They will reject that vision because it does not align with what they want. It does not align with the narrative that they have. And I know that I said that we are uncovering Job's journey, but there are so many lessons that we can take away from Job's friends. We have to understand that we will never get to a place where we are unteachable. We have to continue to have a humble heart and always be open for understanding, always be open for correction, always be open to wisdom, because we are never going to get to a place where we know everything. And if you get to a point where you feel unteachable, if you get to a point where you feel like you know it all, you are going to have a very hard journey with God, because God is always trying to do something new with us. God is always trying to grow us. God is always trying to educate us and enhance us in areas that we've never experienced, areas that we don't understand, areas that we have no knowledge in. And if you have this attitude of thinking that I have arrived and I know everything and there is nothing else that I can be taught, there is nothing else that I can get different insight and different perspectives on, you're always going to reject what God is trying to give you, and you're going to remain in the same place. You're never going to see growth. You're never going to see God move. And you might even get to a point where you're frustrated and you're asking God, why are you not coming through for me? And God will say, come through for yourself, since you know everything. Since you have all the wisdom, what do you need minds for? Since you have all the power, what do you need minds for? Why would I open myself up and come through for you if you are not willing to listen to my way? You want me to get on board with what you know. You want me to get on board with the wisdom that you have, instead of learning from me and following me. Being unteachable is a dangerous place to be, because it's going to keep you stuck. And more importantly, when you come across people who are on different seasons of their journey with God, and you're supposed to be the one comforting them, you could possibly take them off track, because you're so unteachable, you don't recognize what God is trying to do for them. You don't want to get in the way of what God is trying to do for another believer. Now we're going to read chapters 19 and 20. Then Job spoke again. How long will you torture me? How long will you try to crush me with your words? You have already insulted me 10 times. You should be ashamed of treating me so badly. Even if I have sinned, that is my concern, not yours. You think you're better than I am, using my humiliation as evidence of my sin. But it is God who has wronged me, capturing me in his net. I cry out, help, but no one answers me. I protest, but there is no justice. God has blocked my way so I cannot move. He has plunged my path into darkness. He has stripped me out of my honor and removed the crown from my head. He has demolished me on every side, and I am finished. He has uprooted my hope like a fallen tree. His fury burns against me. He counts me as an enemy. His troops advance. They build up roads to attack me. They camp all around my tent. My relatives stay far away, and my friends have turned against me. My family is gone, and my close friends have forgotten me. My servants and maids consider me a stranger. I am like a foreigner to them. When I call my servant, he doesn't come. I have to plead with him. My breath is repulsive to my wife. I am rejected by my own family. Even young children despise me. When I stand to speak, they turn their backs on me. My close friends detest me. Those I loved have turned against me. I have been reduced to skin and bones, and have escaped death by the skin of my teeth. Have mercy on me, my friends. Have mercy, for the hand of God has struck me. Must you also persecute me like God does? Haven't you chewed me up enough? Oh, that my words could be recorded. Oh, that they could be inscribed on a monument, carved with an iron chisel and filled with lead, engraved forever in the rock. But as for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and he will stand upon the earth at last. And after my body has decayed, yet in my body I will see God. I will see him for myself. Yes, I will see him with my own eyes. I am overwhelmed at the thought. How dare you go on persecuting me, saying it's his own fault? You should fear punishment yourselves, for your attitude deserves punishment. Then you will know that there is indeed a judgment. Then Zophar the Naamathite replied, I must reply because I am greatly disturbed. I've had to endure your insults, but now my spirit prompts me to reply. Don't you realize that from the beginning of time, ever since people were first placed on the earth, the triumph of the wicked has been short lived, and the joy of the godless has been only temporary? Though the proud of the godless reaches to the heavens and their heads touch the clouds, yet they will vanish forever, thrown away like their own dung. Those who knew them will ask, where are they? They will fade like a dream and not be found. They will vanish like a vision in the night. Those who once saw them will see them no more. Their families will never see them again. Their children will beg from the poor, for they must give back their stolen riches. Though they are young, their bones will lie in dust. They enjoyed the sweet taste of wickedness, letting it melt under their tongue. They savored it, holding it long in their mouths. But suddenly the food in their bellies turned sour, a poisonous venom in their stomach. They will vomit the wealth they swallowed. God won't let them keep it down. They will suck the poison of cobras. The viper will kill them. They will never again enjoy streams of olive oil or rivers of milk and honey. They will give back everything they worked for. Their wealth will bring them no joy, for they oppressed the poor and left them destitute. They foreclosed on their homes. They were always greedy and never satisfied. Nothing remains of all the things they dreamed about. Nothing left after they finished gorging themselves. Therefore, their prosperity will not endure. In the midst of plenty, they will run into trouble and be overcome by misery. May God give them a bellyful of trouble. May God rain down his anger upon them. When they try to escape an iron weapon, a bronze-tipped arrow will pierce them. The arrow is pulled from their back, and the arrowhead glistens with blood. The terrors of death are upon them. Their treasures will be shown into deepest darkness. A wildfire will devour their goods, consuming all they have left. The heavens will reveal their guilt, and the earth will testify against them. A flood will sweep away their house. God's anger will descend on them in torrents. This is the reward that God gives the wicked. It is an inheritance decreed by God. I want to point out chapter 19, verses 3 through 4, where Job said, "You have already insulted me 10 times. You should be ashamed of treating me so badly. Even if I have sinned, that is my concern, not yours." This shows a prime mistake that a lot of us make. When we feel like somebody deserves something, we tend to talk to them in a condescending way. We tend to come at them judgmental. We tend to come at them with insults. And in Job's situation, Job did nothing wrong, so this was undeserved. But what about the situations where people actually do deserve it? What if they actually did sin? What if they actually are evil? What if they actually did make a mistake? This goes back to what we talked about in episode 172. Correcting somebody is a form of love, but it's not what you say, it's how you say it. We have to get out of the mentality of thinking that just because somebody sinned or just because their sin is on display, because all of us sin, it's just that some people do it publicly. So just because their sin is on display, just because their mistake is on display, just because their failure is on display, does not give us the right to treat them any type of way, does not give us the right to act as if we are better than them or act as if they do not deserve respect. Unconditional love means no matter what happens, my attitude towards you is not going to change. Meaning, even if you sin, my respect for you is not going to change. Even if you mess up, my attitude and the way that I talk to you is not going to change. Just because somebody messes up and they do something that you do not agree with does not give you the right to talk to them in a condescending way, to talk down to them as if they are beneath you. Because what you don't understand is, we talked about this again in episode 172. People don't care about your good deed. People don't care about the fact that you're trying to correct them. What they care about is the intent behind it. What they care about is the tone behind it. And if you are coming at me crazy, I am no longer hearing anything that you are saying. What I am doing is getting on defense mode. What I am doing is looking at you as a threat. I'm looking at you as somebody that I don't want to talk to. I'm looking at at you as somebody that I don't want to be around. I'm going to reject what you're saying, and I'm going to reject you as well because you have offended me. And I understand to an extent why many people talk to people crazy when they sin and they mess up, because we tend to get into this mentality of thinking that we need to defend God. If you messed up, if you're not living righteous, then I have to defend God and I have to say something to you on his behalf. But little do we realize God don't need us to speak for him. God don't need us to come defend him. There is something that Job said in verse 29 of chapter 19. He said, "You should fear punishment yourselves, for your attitude deserves punishment. Then you will know that there is indeed a judgment." For everybody who has this mentality of downing people and being judgmental to people because you feel like you need to stand up for God or whatever other reason you are doing this, do you feel like God is pleased with you? Do you feel like God is more pleased with you than he is the person who sinned or the person who made the mistake? If you have been listening to the podcast for the past couple weeks, you should understand what unconditional love is by now. Unconditional love means that I do not love you based on what you're doing or not doing. I love you for who you are. And God is saying, I do not love you based on what you're doing or what you're not doing, based on if you sin or if you don't sin, based on if you make a mistake or if you don't make a mistake. I love you for who you are. So if somebody messes up, if somebody did something wrong, if somebody committed a sin, in the eyes of God, they are still his child. And my question to you is, what gives you the right to talk to a child of God in that type of way? What gives you the right to think that this child of God is less than you because they messed up? But I want you to understand, just because they messed up in this way does not mean that you are perfect or that you are better than them, because you're messing up too by the way that you're talking to them. You're messing up too by the way that you're judging them. You're messing up too by having a cocky attitude and putting them beneath you. So don't you think that God is just as displeased with you as he is with them for the mistakes that they made? Do not talk to people crazy just because they did something that you do not agree with, because that's not love. Another thing that stuck out to me when I was reading chapter 19 was verses 7 through 12, where he said, "I cry out, help, but no one answers me. I protest, but there is no justice. God has blocked my way so I cannot move. He has plunged my path into darkness. He has stripped me of my honor and removed the crown from my head. He has demolished me on every side, and I am finished. He has uprooted my hope like a fallen tree. His fury burns against me. He counts me as an enemy. His troops advance. They build up roads to attack me. They camp all around my tent." In these verses, he is basically saying that God does not love him and God views him as an enemy. But when you study the entire book, you'll start to ask yourself, where's the proof of that? Where's the proof that God doesn't love him? Where is the proof that God views him as an enemy? There is no proof. This is something that Job is assuming simply because God is quiet, because God is not saying anything back, because God is not speaking to him at the time that he wants him to speak. He automatically assumed what God is thinking and took that as fact. There are going to be so many situations where we are praying to God in a hard time, and God does not come through and answer us when we want him to. And in those moments, we'll start to assume things. We'll start to assume God doesn't care. We'll start to assume God will never be there. We'll start to assume God has abandoned me. And there's no proof of this. There's no facts. This isn't something that God said to us. This is something that we are assuming. And we have to be very careful with assuming how God thinks, because we will start to take those things as fact and let it kill our faith and turn us off track to what God wants us to do. It's also going to make it extremely harder for us to hear God, because we already put this wall up of thinking God doesn't like me. God doesn't want to say anything to me. And it's going to block us from being able to feel his presence, feel him speaking to us, allowing him to get through to us. Another thing that verses 7 through 12 shows us is that we have to be very careful of the things that we say to God when we're upset. Because if we go back to verse 7, he says, I cry out help, but no one answers me. I protest, but there is no justice. Job is clearly telling us that he is hurt and he is upset that God is not coming through and God is not speaking to him in this season. But if you go back to part 2, when I was reading the chapters from part 2, and I even think there was some in part 1, there were many times where Job told God to leave him alone. He said, get away from me, leave me alone and let me be at peace. And although when Job was telling God to leave him alone, he was referring to the situation, because in his head, he feels like God caused the situation. He feels like God is just tormenting him. So he's saying, leave me alone, as take this situation away and allow me to be at peace and at least experience some type of comfort. But what he does not realize is when he is telling God, leave me alone, he's rejecting God altogether. You're basically saying, I don't want anything to do with you. Leave me alone. I don't want to hear from you. Leave me alone. So one could question, how can you be hurt and how can you be upset that God is not coming through and God is not speaking and God is not declaring your innocence when you said multiple times, leave me alone, God? And many of us do this as well. We may not specifically say, God, leave me alone. But in the moments where you feel the urge to pray, but then you tell yourself, well, I'm not going to pray because what's the point? There's no power in praying. Every time I pray, nothing happens. Every time I pray, I don't hear from God. Every time I pray, my situation does not get better. What is the point of praying? In those moments where you're experiencing a storm and you used to fast every single week, but you haven't fasted in months. You used to read your Bible every single morning, but you have not picked up your Bible in days. And the moments where you're listening to people online, you're listening to your pastors and they're telling you God is good. And in your heart, you feel bitterness. In your heart, you feel like, yeah, right. If he was good, I wouldn't be in this situation. Your actions are showing that you are telling God to leave you alone. Your actions are showing that you do not want anything to do with God. Your actions are showing that you are rejecting God. So we can't be confused when we feel like God's not coming through. We can't be confused when we feel like God is not speaking to us, because we're not giving him the opportunity. We're not opening up the door to him. We're not showing him that we are open to hearing from him. We're telling him through our actions, I don't want anything to do with you. And so we have to be very careful of the things that we say, and we have to be very careful of how we treat God in our tough moments, how we treat God in our painful moments. In last week's episode, I did a whole segment about actions speaking louder than words, and I said that's not true. I said actions and words are equal, and they are, because you can see somebody's intent through their words and you can see somebody's intent through their actions. So for some of you, yes, you may have told God, I don't want anything to do with you, I'm done. But for others, you have not specifically said that, but your actions have shown that. So you have to monitor and you have to observe the way that you have been acting lately. You have to observe the way that you've been showing up for God lately, and you have to ask yourself a tough question. What does my actions say? What are my actions saying to God? My actions are communicating to God on my behalf. What is it saying? Is it showing him that I care? Is it showing him that I'm open to him? Is it showing him that I want his help? Or is it showing him that I'm rejecting him? So now we're going to go to chapters 21 and 22. Then Job spoke again. Listen closely to what I am saying. That's one consolation you can give me. Bear with me and let me speak. After I have spoken, you may resume mocking me. My complaint is with God, not with people. I have good reason to be so impatient. Look at me and be stunned. Put your hand over your mouth in shock. When I think about what I am saying, I shudder. My body trembles. Why do the wicked prosper, growing old and powerful? They live to see their children grow up and settle down, and they enjoy their grandchildren. Their homes are safe from every fear, and God does not punish them. Their bulls never fail to breed. Their cows bear calves and never miscarry. They let their children frisk about like lambs. Their little ones skip and dance. They sing with tambourines and harps. They celebrate to the sound of the flute. They spend their days in prosperity, then go down to the grave in peace. And yet they say to God, "Go away. We want no part of you and your ways. Who is the Almighty, and why should we obey him? What good will it do us to pray?" They think their prosperity is of their own doing, but I will have nothing to do with that kind of thinking. Yet the light of the wicked never seems to be extinguished. Do they ever have trouble? Does God distribute sorrows to them in anger? Are they driven before the wind like straw? Are they carried away by the storm like chaffs? Not at all. Well, you say, at least God will punish their children, but I say he should punish the ones who sin, so that they understand his judgment. Let them see their destruction with their own eyes. Let them drink deeply of the anger of the Almighty. For they will not care what happens to their family after they are dead. But who can teach a lesson to God, since he judges even the most powerful? One person dies in prosperity, completely comfortable and secure, the picture of good health, vigorous and fit. Another person dies in bitter poverty, never having tasted the good life, but both are buried in the same dust, both eaten by the maggots. Look, I know what you're thinking. I know the schemes you plot against me. You will tell me of rich and wicked people whose houses have vanished because of their sins. But ask those who have been around, and they will tell you the truth. Evil people are spared in times of calamity and are allowed to escape disaster. No one criticizes them openly or pays them back for what they have done. When they are carried to the grave, an honor guard keeps watch at their tomb. A great funeral procession goes to the cemetery. Many pay their respects as the body is laid to rest, and the earth gives sweet response. How can your empty cliches comfort me? All your explanations are lies. Then Eliphaz the Temanite replied, "Can a person do anything to help God? Can even a wise person be helpful to him? Is it any advantage to the Almighty if you are righteous? Would it be any gain to him if you were perfect? Is it because you're so pious that he accuses you and brings judgment against you? No, it's because of your wickedness. There's no limit to your sins. For example, you must have lent money to your friend and demanded clothing as a security. Yes, you stripped him to the bone. You must have refused water for the thirsty and food for the hungry. You probably think the land belongs to the powerful and only the privileged have a right to it. You must have sent widows away empty-handed and crushed the hopes of orphans. That is why you are surrounded by traps and tremble from sudden fears. That is why you cannot see in the darkness and waves of water covers you. God is so great, higher than the heavens, higher than the farthest stars. But you reply, that's why God can't see what I'm doing. How can he judge through the thick darkness? For thick clouds swirl about him, and he cannot see us. He is way up there, walking on the vault of heaven. Will you continue on the old paths where evil people have walked? They were snatched away in the prime of life, the foundations of their lives washed away. For they said to God, leave us alone. What can the Almighty do to us? Yet he was the one who filled their homes with good things, so I will have nothing to do with that kind of thinking. The righteous will be happy to see the wicked destroyed, and the innocent will laugh in contempt. They will say, see how our enemies have been destroyed, the last of them have been consumed in the fire. Submit to God and you will have peace. Then things will go well for you. Listen to his instructions and store them in your heart. If you return to the Almighty, you will be restored. So clean up your life. If you give up your lust for money and throw your precious gold into the river, the Almighty himself will be your treasure. He will be your precious silver. Then you can take delight in the Almighty and look up to God. You will pray to him and he will hear you, and you will fulfill your vows to him. You will succeed in whatever you choose to do, and light will shine on the road ahead of you. If people are in trouble and you say help them, God will save them. Even sinners will be rescued. They will be rescued because your hands are pure. So the first thing that stuck out to me was when I was reading chapter 21, verse 4, where Job said, "My complaint is with God, not with people. I have good reason to be so impatient." This stood out to me because Job said that his complaint is with God and it's not with people. Yet, throughout this whole story, up until chapter 21, Job has been spending all of his time explaining himself to people and not to God. We have to realize that people are always going to have an opinion. People are always going to have a judgment. People are always going to have a point of view. People are always going to have something to say about what we are going through and what is happening in our life. It does not matter if life is good for us. It does not matter if life is bad. People are always going to have an opinion. And when you make the decision to explain yourself to people, to beg them to see your pain, to beg them to see your hurt, to beg them to see where you are coming from, you are wasting time. So you are wondering why God isn't coming through for you. In part 2, we talked about how maybe the reason why God had not been speaking to Job is because he is too distracted. Because in order for you to hear from God, you have to give God a moment to speak to you. You cannot always be the one talking. You cannot always be busy and doing something and never sit down and give God a moment to speak. That's how communication works. You have to take a moment to be quiet. You have to take a moment to sit in silence, and you have to open up the doors to God and give him an opportunity to speak. But that has not happened, because every time that Job expresses himself to God, immediately one of his friends interrupts and they come in with an opinion. Then instead of Job sitting there waiting for God to give him a response, he turns his attention to his friends, and then he starts trying to explain himself to them. Then he starts trying to explain why they are wrong. That is another thing. Because some of us don't waste time just explaining ourselves. We try to explain to other people why what they're doing to us is wrong. I want you to understand, it's not your responsibility to correct people. God will correct people in the right time. You do not want to waste time in your life trying to get other people to understand how they wronged you. We all read the story of Job, right? We're not there yet, but we know that by the end of the chapter, God is going to come in and he's going to correct Job's friends. It's not our job to sit here and get people to understand our point of view, our pain, our hurt, and why they are wrong, why the way that they are treating us is wrong. Our job is to get clarity from God, move forward with God, and in God's timing, he will deal with those people himself. And I know that it's easier said than done, because a lot of people who are giving us their opinion, they're not strangers. If it was just a random stranger on the internet, who cares? We don't know them. But when it's your friends, when it's your family, when it's somebody who actually matters to you, when it's somebody whose opinion you actually value, it's really hard not to argue with them. It's really hard not to be hurt by what they are saying. But you have to ask yourself, whose opinion matters most, them or God's? Who do you want to hear from the most, them or God? See, if you choose them, you waste time and you stay here and you prove them right, because you are not reaching the things that God is trying to get you to reach. But if you choose to take your focus off of them and put it onto God, you can prove them wrong. You can allow God to correct them, and then y'all can move forward in your relationship, and they can use this as a teaching moment as to why they should support you next time. The next thing that I noticed was in chapter 22, verses 6 through 11, when Eliphaz was talking to Job about why this was happening. He said, for example, you must have lent money to your friend and demanded clothing as security. Yes, you stripped him to the bone. You must have refused water for the thirsty and food for the hungry. You probably think the land belongs to the powerful and only the privileged have a right to it. You must have sent widows away empty-handed and crushed the hopes of orphans. This is why you are surrounded by traps and tremble from sudden fears. This is why you cannot see in the darkness and waves of water covers you. As I was reading that, there should be two words that stood out to you. When he was talking about the things that Job did, he said, you must, you probably, meaning I don't know this to be fact, but I'm just assuming this because I don't understand why you are going through this. When you are going through something and God has not opened the people's eyes around you to be able to understand what he is doing, sometimes they have to make assumptions to fit their narratives and make them feel like they are right and make your situation seem understandable. Because a lot of us don't like confusion. A lot of us don't like to be confused. We want an explanation as to why things happen. We want to be able to explain why you're suffering, why this happened to you. And sometimes we like to create narratives and think the worst so that it makes us feel like we understand what's going on. And I talked about this in part 2, and I talked about it as if you were in the shoes of one of his friends. And I was saying, if you don't understand, sit in silence with them and wait for God to speak to both of y'all and give y'all clarity. But now I kind of want to talk about this as if you were Job. When you are in a suffering situation and you don't understand what's going on, you don't understand why this is happening, and maybe the people around you don't understand why this is happening. Maybe they're telling you things to get you off track to what God is trying to do. I want you to pay attention to their explanations. Pay attention to the wording, because that one word must, that one word probably changed the entire narrative of the sentence. It took a statement into a probability. It took a fact into an assumption. Pay attention to their wording, because if you do that, it's going to start exposing, where is this coming from? Are they confused? Do they know this as fact? Did God speak this to them? Should I be taking this? Should I be listening to this? Pay attention to what they are saying and how they are saying it. And once you start realizing they don't know what they're talking about, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to stand firm in faith. So before we end, I want to go ahead and read chapters 23 and 24. Then Job spoke again. My complaint today is still a bitter one, and I try hard not to groan aloud. If only I knew where to find God, I will go to his court. I will lay out my case and present my arguments. Then I will listen to his reply and understand what he says to me. Will he use his great power to argue with me? No, he would give me a fair hearing. Honest people can reason with him, so I would be forever acquitted by my judge. I go east, but he is not there. I go west, but I cannot find him. I do not see him in the north, for he is hidden. I look to the south, but he is concealed. But he knows where I am going, and when he tests me, I will come out as pure as gold, for I have stayed on God's paths. I have followed his ways and not turned aside. I have not departed from his commands, but have treasured his words more than daily food. But once he has made his decision, who can change his mind? Whatever he wants to do, he does. So he will do to me whatever he has planned. He controls my destiny. No wonder I am so terrified in his presence. When I think of it, terror grips me. God has made me sick at heart. The Almighty has terrified me. Darkness is all around me. Thick, impenetrable darkness is everywhere. Why doesn't the Almighty bring the wicked to judgment? Why must the godly wait for him in vain? Evil people steal land by moving the boundary markers. They steal livestock and put them into their own pastures. They take the orphan's donkeys and demand the widow's ox as security for a loan. The poor are pushed off the path. The needy must hide together for safety. Like wild donkeys in the wilderness, the poor must spend all their time looking for food, searching even in the desert for food for their children. They harvest a field they do not own, and they glean in the vineyards of the wicked. All night they lie naked in the cold, without clothing or covering. They are soaked by mountain showers, and they huddle against the rocks for want of a home. The wicked snatch a widow's child from her breast, taking the baby as security for a loan. The poor must go about naked, without any clothing. They harvest food for others while they themselves are starving. They press out olive oil without being allowed to taste it, and they tread in the winepress as they suffer from thirst. The groans of the dying rise from the city, and the wounded cry for help, yet God ignores their moaning. Wicked people rebel against the light. They refuse to acknowledge its ways or stay in its paths. The murderer rises in the early dawn to kill the poor and needy. At night he is a thief. The adulterer waits for the twilight, saying, "No one will see me then." He hides his face so no one will know him. Thieves break into houses at night and sleep in the daytime. They are not acquainted with the light. The black night is their morning. They ally themselves with the terrors of the darkness, but they disappear like foam down a river. Everything they own is cursed, and they are afraid to enter their own vineyards. The grave consumes sinners just as drought and heat consume snow. Their own mothers will forget them. Maggots will find them sweet to eat. No one will remember them. Wicked people are broken like a tree in the storm. They cheat the woman who has no son to help her. They refuse to help the needy widow. God, in his power, drags away the rich. They may rise high, but they have no assurance of life. They may be allowed to live in security, but God is always watching them. And though they are great now, in a moment they will be gone like all the others, cut off from the heads of grain. Can anyone claim otherwise? Who can prove me wrong? So we're going to stop there for today. Before we go, I do want to give you a weekly action step. So sometime this week, I want you to identify the people in your life who has been distracting you. And you may be wondering, like, okay, well, how do I know that they're distracting me? Number one, I want you to either re-listen to this episode, or I want you to go study the story of Job for yourself and pay attention to the things that his friends are saying and the ways that they are acting. If you don't have time to do that, the way that you can identify if somebody is distracting you is if what they're saying is not matching the things that God has told you, or if they have opinions that are making you question God and go off track to the things that he told you to pursue. Once you identify these people, go to God about them, pray for them, but also ask God, how can you keep your eye on him and not focus on what they are saying? Because like I said, it's easy to say don't be distracted. But when these distractions are coming from people that you genuinely love and you genuinely care about, it's going to be a little difficult for you to not want to prove your point to them or not want to, go back and forth with them because you value their opinion. You want them to see things from your side. So go to God and ask him, how do I keep my eye on you and not on them? But that is all that I have for you today. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe so that you get a notification every time a new episode is released. Also, leave a review and let me and others know how you enjoyed the show. And if you want to stay connected, follow me on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Prospering with Christ. But that's all I have for you today. I will see you next week. Next week, we are going into part 4 of Job's story of learning to love God unconditionally.